close your eyes. Let the darkness of the room wrap around you like a heavy blanket. Let the noise of the modern world fade away. The traffic, the notifications, the hum of electricity, until there is nothing left but the sound of the wind and the rhythm of the ocean. Now, imagine traveling back in time. Not just a few hundred years, not to the time of castles or pyramids, but back into the deep, frozen history of our planet. It is 28,000 years ago. You are standing at the very edge of the world. To the south, across a narrow strait of churning water, lies the continent of Africa. To the north, a wall of ice has swallowed most of Europe. You are on the southern tip of the Iberian Peninsula, on a great limestone rock that juts out into the sea. Today we call this place Gibraltar, but for you it doesn't have a name. It is simply the last safe place, the last refuge. You are sitting at the mouth of a cave, huddled close to a small dying fire. The flames are weak, flickering orange against the gray rock, struggling to stay alive against the damp salt air blowing in from the Atlantic. It is cold, a bone-deep, penetrating cold that never really leaves you, a kind of cold that seeps into the stone, into the earth, into your very marrow. Outside, the waves are crashing against the cliffs below, a rhythmic, endless pounding that has been the soundtrack of your entire life. Look around you. The cave is vast, filled with shadows that dance and stretch in the firelight. But it is also empty. There used to be voices here. There used to be the sound of children laughing, of tools chipping against flint, of stories being told in low, guttural tones. Now there is only the wind and the silence. You are waiting for the others to return from the hunt, but deep down in a place you don't like to visit, you know they aren't coming back. The group has been getting smaller for years. First, the elders passed, unable to survive the harsh winters, and the children taken by sickness or hunger. Now, the hunters are gone too. It is just you, alone in the dark, watching the embers fade from orange to gray. If you are using this to fall asleep, perfect. That is exactly why I make these videos. So maybe hit subscribe, and definitely tell me in the comments where you are and what time it is right now. I love checking and seeing like Seattle in the rain, or Melbourne at 3 a.m., or New York just drifting off. All of us, separated by distance but connected by this story. It's kind of beautiful when you think about it. So settle in, get comfortable. Let your shoulders drop. Unclench your jaw. Let's go back to that cave. Let's go back to the moment when an entire branch of the human family tree flickered and went out. Because this isn't just a story about a caveman. This is the story of the longest, loneliest night in human history. This is the story of the Neanderthals. Picture this. You stand up and walk toward a pool of still water collected in a hollow of the cave floor. The firelight catches the surface, creating a dark mirror. You look down at your reflection, and what stares back at you is familiar but different. If you saw this face on a subway train today, you would stare. You would know instantly that this person didn't quite fit. The first thing you notice is the brow. A heavy, continuous ridge of bone that arches over your eyes like a visor. It gives your face an intensity, a permanent look of deep concentration. Your eyes are large, deep-set, dark pools adapted to see in the low light of northern winters. Your nose is massive, broad and projecting, a biological radiator designed to warm the freezing air before it hits your lungs. There is no chin to speak of, just a jaw that slopes back, powered by muscles so strong they could crush bone. Look at your body. You aren't built like a modern marathon runner. You are built like a bunker. You are shorter than the average modern human, maybe 5 feet 5 inches. But you are immensely powerful. Your chest is a barrel thick and deep, housing lungs with enormous capacity. Your bones are thick, walled, and heavy. Your muscles are dense, compact, and tireless. You are a creature of pure power, designed by evolution for bursts of explosive strength. If you shook hands with a modern professional bodybuilder, you could probably crush their hand without trying. This is a body built for one thing: survival in a world that wants to kill you. For 300,000 years, this body was the pinnacle of human engineering. It was the biological answer to the Ice Age. While the ancestors of modern humans were evolving in the warm savannas of Africa, becoming tall and slender to shed heat, you were here in the fortress of Europe and Asia, evolving to keep it. You are the result of hundreds of thousands of winters. Every curve of your bone, every fiber of your muscle, is a testament to resilience. But tonight, looking in that reflection, you see something else. You see age. You see scars, a line of white scar tissue running down your shoulder where a bison gored you a decade ago. A stiffness in your knee from a fall on the ice. You are tired. Not just physical exhaustion, but a deep, genetic weariness. You are the last of your kind in this cave. Maybe the last in the valley. Maybe, though you have no way of knowing it, the last on Earth. Think about that. The absolute isolation. We talk about loneliness in the modern world, feeling alone in a crowded room, or not getting enough likes on a post. But this is an ontological loneliness. A solitude so complete it echoes through your DNA. You are a social animal. Your brain, larger than a modern human's brain, is wired for connection. It craves the touch of another, the sound of a familiar voice, the shared warmth of a group sleeping together in a pile of furs. Without it, you are an amputation, a limb cut off from the body. You sit back down by the fire. You feed it a precious piece of dried juniper wood. The smell is sharp and sweet. You look out at the dark ocean again. You don't know that you are the last. You just know that the world has become very quiet. You don't know that thousands of years from now, scientists will dig up your bones and give you a name based on a valley in Germany. You don't know that museums will display reconstructions of your face. You just know that the night is cold, and the fire is the only friend you have left. Now, you might be thinking, wait, aren't Neanderthals just dumb cavemen? Didn't they die out because they were stupid? We've all seen the cartoons, the hunched figure with the club, dragging his knuckles, grunting, banging rocks together. The archetype of the primitive. Even the word Neanderthal is used as an insult today. If someone is backward or brutish, we call them a Neanderthal. But here is where history gets it wrong, completely, tragically wrong. And to understand why they disappeared, we first have to understand who they really were. Because they weren't monsters, they were family. And for a very, very long time, they were the successful ones. Let's look at the timeline. It puts everything in perspective. Modern humans, Homo sapiens, us, we've been around for about 200,000 to 300,000 years. But for most of that time, we were confined to Africa, just another primate trying to figure things out. Civilization, that's only 6,000 years old. Industrial society. A blink of an eye. Neanderthals. They appeared in the fossil record around 400,000 years ago. They dominated Europe and parts of Asia for over 350,000 years. Think about that number. 350,000 years. That is an eternity. They survived glacial cycles that turned Europe into a frozen wasteland. They survived interglacial periods where hippos swam in the Thames River. They lived through volcanic supereruptions and climate shifts that would break modern civilization in a week. If you measure success by longevity, they were incredibly successful. If you landed on Earth 100,000 years ago and placed a bet on which human species would inherit the planet, you wouldn't have bet on the skinny, fragile creatures in Africa. You would have bet on the Neanderthals. They were the tanks. They were the ones who had conquered the cold, and they weren't stupid, not even close. The archaeological record shows us something fascinating. They had culture. They controlled fire, not just gathering it from lightning strikes, but making it. They manufactured a glue from birch bark pitch to attach stone points to wooden spears, a chemical process that requires precise temperature control and implied a complex understanding of materials. Try doing that without a chemistry degree or a thermometer. They did it in a cave, in the dark, with nothing but intuition and past. Down knowledge, they wore clothes. You don't survive an ice age naked. They processed hides, turning animal skins into leather to protect themselves from the biting wind. They knew the landscape intimately. Every plant, every rock, every migration route of the reindeer and the mammoth. They were masters of their environment in a way we can barely comprehend. But it goes deeper than technology. It goes to the heart. For a long time, we thought Neanderthals were incapable of emotion or symbolic thought. We thought they were biological robots, just eating and sleeping and reproducing. But the bones tell a different story. In a cave in Iraq, known as Shanidar, archaeologists found the skeleton of an elderly Neanderthal male. Scientists call him Shanidar 1. He was old, maybe 40 or 50, which was ancient for the time. But his skeleton told a story of incredible suffering. He had been blinded in one eye by a crushing blow to the face. His right arm was withered, likely amputated or useless from birth or injury. He had a severe limp. He was deaf. In the brutal calculus of the wild, a creature like that should be dead. A lone wolf with a broken leg dies. A deer that can't run is eaten. Nature is not kind to the weak. But Shanidar 1 didn't die when he was injured. He lived for decades after. His injuries showed signs of healing. His teeth were worn down in a way that suggested he used them as a third hand, or perhaps others chewed his food for him. Do you understand what that means? It means someone took care of him. It means his group, his family didn't leave him behind. They slowed down for him. They shared their food with him, even when food was scarce. They guided him when he couldn't see. They protected him when he couldn't fight. That is compassion. That is love. That is humanity. In its rawest, most fundamental form. We find other evidence too. We find burials. Neanderthals didn't just leave their dead to rot or be eaten by scavengers. They dug graves. They placed the bodies carefully, often in a fetal position, as if sleeping. In some sites, soil analysis suggests they were buried with flowers, yarrow cornflower, grape hyacinth. Imagine that scene. A group of these rugged, powerful survivors, standing around a grave in the driving sleet, placing delicate, colorful flowers on the body of a loved one, weeping, grieving. asking the same questions we ask today when we lose someone. Where did they go? Why them? They were us, just a different version of us. A version forged in ice rather than heat. They had larger brains than we do today. They likely had language, perhaps different in structure, maybe more musical or guttural, but capable of conveying complex information. They planned. They dreamed. They looked up at the moon and wondered what it was. So get that image of the brutish monster out of your head, erase it. Instead, replace it with the image of a skilled survivor, a master of the wilderness, a loving parent, a loyal sibling. But if they were so smart, so strong, so loving, and so well adapted, why are they gone? Why is that cave in Gibraltar empty? Why are you, the modern human, sitting here listening to this on a smartphone while they are nothing but dust and fragments of DNA? That is the mystery. And it's not what you think. It wasn't a sudden war. There was no single day where the humans rose up and slaughtered the Neanderthals. It wasn't a plague that wiped them out overnight. It was something much slower, much more subtle, and ultimately much more terrifying. It is the story of a slow squeeze, the story of hardware versus software, a story of how being the best specialist in the world can be a death sentence when the world changes. To understand their end, we have to look at their beginning. We have to look at the trap that evolution set for them. A trap that was disguised as a gift. The very things that made them the kings of the Ice Age, their massive bodies, their heavy bones, their high-energy brains, were the things that would eventually doom them. Imagine an economy of calories. Every living thing is a business, and calories are the currency. You have to earn calories by finding food, and you have to spend calories to move, keep warm, and think. The Neanderthals were running a high-end luxury business model. Their bodies were Ferraris, high performance, massive power, but terrible fuel efficiency. A Neanderthal needed huge amounts of energy just to exist. Some estimates suggest a Neanderthal male needed 4,000 to 5,000 calories a day just to maintain body weight during winter. That is double what a modern human needs. That's like eating 5 or 6 Big Macs every single day, just to break even. And remember, they didn't have drive-thrust. They had to hunt for every single calorie. They had to wrestle massive beasts like woolly rhinos and mammoths. This high-energy strategy worked beautifully when the large game was abundant. When the forests were thick and the herds were massive, they could ambush a bison, kill it with thrusting spears, and feast for days. It was a high-risk, high-reward lifestyle, but it was fragile. It depended on stability. It depended on the world staying the way it was, but the world never stays the way it is. Around 45,000 years ago, the climate began to flicker. The stable, cold periods became erratic. The dense forests that Neanderthals used for ambush hunting began to recede, replaced by open, windswept steppes. The massive herds began to thin out or migrate unpredictably. The easy calories were disappearing, and right at that moment of vulnerability, right when the Neanderthal business model was starting to show cracks, something else appeared on the horizon. A competitor, not a stronger competitor, not a tougher one. In fact, on paper, this new competitor looked pathetic. They were weak. Their bones were thin. They froze easily. They had smaller brains. But they had a cheat code. They had figured out a way to break the rules of the biological game. They didn't adapt to the cold by growing thick bones. They adapted by sewing tight clothes. They didn't adapt to dangerous hunting by getting stronger. They adapted by inventing weapons that could kill from a distance. They were us, Homo sapiens. We arrived in Europe not as conquerors, but as refugees ourselves, moving out of Africa, following the game, looking for a home. And when we bumped into the Neanderthals, it was the clash of two completely different evolutionary philosophies. The ultimate biological organism versus the ultimate cultural organism. Hardware versus software. And as you sit by that dying fire in Gibraltar, looking at your reflection, you are the tragic result of that clash. You are the superior biological specimen, obsolete in a world that no longer cares about biology. The wind is picking up outside the cave now. The fire is getting lower. You can feel the darkness pressing in. You don't know about calories or climate change or evolutionary theory. You just know that the hunt failed today and it failed yesterday. You just know that the strange, skinny people in the valley below seem to be finding food when you can't. You hear their strange, high-pitched voices carrying on the wind. There are so many of them, and so few of you. You pull your fur wrap tighter around your shoulders. The cold is a living thing tonight. It wants to claim you, but you are a Neanderthal. You do not give up. You have survived the ice for 300,000 years. You will survive tonight, or maybe you won't. Let's dig deeper into this, because the story of how we replace them isn't just about food. It is about something much more profound. It is about how we connect. It is about the invisible lines that tie us together. It is about the loneliness that you, the last Neanderthal, are feeling right now. That loneliness isn't just an emotion. It is the reason you are extinct. Think about your social world. As a Neanderthal, your world is small, intimate. You live with your immediate family, maybe 10 or 15 people. You know them better than you know yourself. You trust them with your life. But you rarely meet anyone else. Strangers are dangerous. Strangers are competition. If you encounter another group, you might fight, or you might avoid them, but you don't trade with them. You don't share secrets with them. Your circle of trust ends at the cave entrance. Now look at the invaders, the sapiens. They are weird. They live in larger bands, 30, 50, sometimes 100 people. But it's not just the size of the group, it's the connections between the groups. We find seashells used as jewelry hundreds of miles from the ocean in sapiens camps. We find flint tools made of stone from quarries weeks of walking away. What does that mean? It means they are talking to each other. It means they have a network. It means that when the deer disappear in one valley, a sapiens group can move to another valley and be welcomed by distant cousins or trading partners. They have an insurance policy. They have a wide web of social connection. You, the Neanderthal, do not have this. When the deer disappear in your valley, you starve. You are isolated. Your incredible strength, your massive brain, your mastery of the local terrain, none of it matters if you are trapped on an island of your own making. This is the cruelty of the specialist trap. You evolved to be the perfect master of a specific world. You locked yourself into a way of life that required high energy and close-range hunting. And you locked yourself into small, isolated social groups. It worked for eons. It was a brilliant strategy until the conditions changed. The sapiens were generalists. We were the weeds. We weren't perfect at anything, but we were okay at everything, and we were hyper-social. We gossiped, we traded, we made friends with strangers. We turned software, our culture, our stories, our networks, into a survival mechanism. So as the Ice Age deepened 40,000 years ago, the traps snapped shut. The forests opened up. The ambush cover vanished. Your heavy, energy-expensive body became a liability. You couldn't run down a gazelle on the open steppe. You were built for wrestling bison in the trees. You burned too much fuel, and when you failed there was no one to help you. No distant tribe to send food, no network to fall back on. The circle began to shrink. Archaeology shows this retreat happening in real time. We can track the disappearance of Neanderthal sites from north to south. It wasn't a wave of violence. It was a wave of silence. Sites that had been occupied for thousands of years were simply abandoned. The fires went out. The tools stopped being made. The forest reclaimed the caves. Retreat, retreat, retreat. Down from the north, out of the plains, into the mountains, into the forests that remained, and finally to the very edge of the continent, to places like Gibraltar, the cul-de-sac of Europe. This is why you are here. At the end of the world, this is why you are alone. You are the refugee of a slow-motion apocalypse that took 10,000 years to unfold. You are the victim of a world that shifted its preferences from strength to flexibility, from isolation to connection. And looking into that dark water, staring at your heavy brow and your deep eyes, you are looking at a ghost. You are a biological masterpiece that has been made obsolete by a software update. But here is the thing that makes this story truly haunting. It wasn't just competition. It wasn't just that we out. You are out. Bred you. It's that we got close to you. Very close, because when we met you, we didn't just see a competitor. We saw something else. We saw a reflection of ourselves. We know this because of the DNA. We know this because inside you, the person watching this video, right now there's a ghost hiding in your cells. If your ancestors came from outside of Africa, from Europe or Asia or the Americas, you are part Neanderthal. Imagine that 40,000 years ago, on a cold night much like this one, a sapiens and a Neanderthal met. Maybe they traded. Maybe they shared a fire. Maybe they fell in love. It sounds like fiction, but it is written in the chemical letters of your genome. So, the stranger in the mirror isn't really a stranger at all. They are your grandfather 2,000 times removed. They are the part of you that survives the cold. They are the part of you that fights off certain viruses. They are the part of you that maybe, just maybe, feels a little more at home in the woods than in the city. The Neanderthal at the cave mouth in Gibraltar is alone, but he is not gone. Not really. He is about to vanish into the night, yes. His distinct lineage is about to end, but his story is just merging with ours. As the fire dies down to nothing but red coals, and the cold finally begins to win the battle against the stone, try to hold that thought. The tragedy of extinction is real. The loss of a unique way of being human is a wound that will never heal. But there is also a continuity. For 300,000 years, they were the guardians of the North. They were the masters of the ice. They were the first humans to bury their dead, the first to care for the disabled, the first to perhaps look at a flower and see something beautiful rather than just something to eat. They were the lonely pioneers who showed that humanity could survive in the dark. And tonight, in our imagination, we can sit with that last survivor. We can keep him company for just a little while longer. We can witness his final night not with pity, but with reverence. Because without him, without the challenges his kind forced us to overcome, without the genes he gifted us, without the pressure that honed our own species, we wouldn't be here. The fire is almost out. The wind is howling. The stranger in the mirror closes his eyes. And the world belongs to us. But the silence belongs to them. But here is where the story stops making sense. Here is the paradox that keeps paleoanthropologists awake at night. If the Neanderthals were so perfectly adapted, if they were the biological masters of their environment, if they had survived everything the planet threw at them for 300 millennia, why are they gone? It doesn't add up. In the brutal logic of natural selection, the strong survive and the weak perish. That is the only rule that matters. And by every physical metric, the Neanderthals were the strong ones. They were the incumbents. They held the high ground. They knew the terrain. They had the technology to survive winters that would kill a modern human in 48 hours. Yet, around 40,000 years ago, they vanish, and they vanish fast. In geological time, it's a blink of an eye. One moment the archaeological record of Europe and Western Asia is thick with their presence. We find their Mousterian stone tools in thousands of caves. We find the charcoal from their fires. We find the bones of the animals they butchered. And then, silence. The layers of sediment that follow are empty of their distinct signature. It's like a candle being snuffed out in a drafty room. Some people think it was a slow fade, a gradual decline over tens of thousands of years. But the new radiocarbon dating suggests something much more dramatic, something sharper. In many regions, the transition from a world full of Neanderthals to a world full of modern humans happened in just a few thousand years. In some specific valleys, it might have happened within a few generations. Think about the scale of that. A species that had successfully colonized a territory stretching from the Atlantic coast of Portugal all the way to the Altai Mountains in Siberia. A range of thousands of miles just evaporates. This isn't just a historical curiosity. It is the ultimate cold case. It is a murder mystery on a planetary scale where the victim is our closest relative. And the prime suspect is, well, look in the mirror. Because that is the uncomfortable truth at the center of this story. We are the ones who are left. We are the survivors. And in the history of life on Earth, when one species disappears and another closely related species takes over its territory at the exact same time, it's usually not a coincidence. But was it genocide? Did we kill them? Or was it something else? Something invisible? Did we bring a disease they couldn't fight? Did we eat them? Or did we just love them to death, absorbing their lineage until they ceased to exist as a separate people? The answer matters. It matters because it defines who we are. Are we the children of conquerors, or the children of lucky survivors? Are we the species that kills everything it touches, or are we simply the most adaptable organism this planet has ever produced? To understand the end, we have to understand the machine that was the Neanderthal body. We have to look under the hood, because when you strip away the misconceptions and look at the raw biology, you realize that evolution built a tank. Let's talk about hardware. If you were a bioengineer and you were tasked with designing a human being specifically to survive in a deep freeze, you would build a Neanderthal. Every inch of their anatomy, from the soles of their feet to the shape of their skull, was an answer to the problem of cold. Start with the nose. It's the most distinctive feature on a Neanderthal face. It was huge. Not just broad, but projecting forward, pulling the center of the face out with it. For a long time, scientists thought this was just a random variation. But now we know better. That nose was a machine. It was a high-efficiency radiator and humidifier. When you breathe in air at minus 20 degrees, it can freeze the delicate tissue of your lungs. It shocks your core temperature. The Neanderthal nose was lined with massive mucous membranes that warmed and moistened that dry, freezing air before it ever hit their throat. It was an internal climate control system. Then look at the chest. If you look at a Neanderthal skeleton next to a modern human skeleton, the first thing you notice is the rib cage. Ours is cylindrical, relatively narrow. Theirs was conical, flaring out at the bottom like a bell. It was enormous. This barrel chest housed lungs with a capacity far exceeding ours. They needed oxygen, lots of it, because fueling their massive muscles and generating body heat required a metabolic furnace that burned hot and fast. And those muscles, they were something else. Neanderthal bones are thick. The walls of their limb bones are dense and robust, far thicker than any modern human, and the attachment points for their muscles, the places where the tendons fuse to the bone, are massive. This tells us that the muscles pulling on those bones were incredibly powerful. A modern Olympic weightlifter trains for years to achieve a certain level of strength. A Neanderthal was born with it. It was their baseline. Their arms were shorter than ours, particularly the forearm. Their legs were shorter, particularly the shin. This is a classic biological adaptation called Allen's rule. In cold climates, animals evolve shorter limbs to reduce surface area and conserve heat. But this stocky, compact build had another advantage. Leverage. Have you ever tried to use a crowbar? A shorter lever allows you to apply more force. The Neanderthal body was a system of short, powerful levers. They weren't built for running marathons across the African savanna. They were built for wrestling. And I mean that literally. When anthropologists look at the fracture patterns on Neanderthal bones, the healed breaks and cracks that many adults carried, they notice something strange. The pattern didn't match the injuries you see in modern hunter-gatherers. It didn't match the injuries you see in soldiers or farmers. It matched the injury patterns of modern rodeo riders. Think about what that implies. Rodeo riders get hurt because they interact violently with large, angry animals at close range. They get thrown, they get trampled, they get head-butted. This tells us exactly how Neanderthals lived. They didn't shoot arrows from a safe distance. They didn't set traps and wait. They got up close. They ambushed woolly rhinos and mammoths. They thrust heavy, thick, shafted spears into the flanks of beasts that weighed tons. They held on. They fought for their dinner hand to hand. This required a level of physical courage and durability that is almost impossible for us to imagine. Every meal was a battle. Every winter was a siege. And for hundreds of thousands of years they won. They didn't just survive the Ice Age, they thrived in it. They turned the frozen wastelands of Eurasia into their home. This was their hardware. A body built for trauma, a metabolism built for heat, a skeletal structure built for power. They were the ultimate biological solution to a hostile world. So if they were the tanks of the hominid world, surely they must have been dumb, right? All brawn and no brain. That's the cliché. The lumbering oaf who can crush a rock but can't string a sentence together. Wrong, this is the biggest lie in the history of human evolution, and it's time we put it to rest. Let's look at the facts, the hard data. If you take a skull of a Neanderthal and fill it with seeds to measure the volume, which is how scientists used to do it, or scan it with a laser, you get a number. That number represents cranial capacity, the size of the brain. The average modern human brain size is about 1,350 cubic centimeters. The average Neanderthal brain size, about 1,500 cubic centimeters. Read that again. Their brains were bigger than ours. Now, brain size isn't everything. Whales have huge brains, but they don't build spaceships. The organization of the brain matters. The wiring matters. And we know that the Neanderthal brain was shaped differently. It was longer, lower, stretching back into a shape scientists call an occipital bun. Our brains are more globular, rounder, with expanded frontal lobes. This suggests that they might have thought differently than us. Maybe they were more visual, with those massive eyes and the large visual cortex to process the input. Perhaps their visual memory was photographic in a way we can't conceive. Maybe they didn't daydream the way we do. Maybe they were hyper, focused on the here and now, the immediate reality of the physical world. But different does not mean stupid. For decades, we claimed that Neanderthals didn't have technology. We said they just used found rocks. Then we looked closer at their tools. We found the Lavala technique. This is a method of stone knapping that is incredibly difficult. You don't just bang a rock and hope for a sharp edge. You have to prepare the core. You have to sculpt the stone, strike it at precise angles, visualizing the flake that is hidden inside the rock before you ever hit it. It requires planning, foresight, and geometry. It takes a modern human months of practice to master. Neanderthals were doing it for hundreds of thousands of years. But the real smoking gun, the evidence that destroys the dumb caveman myth forever, it's glue. Birch tar. Archaeologists have found lumps of this black, sticky substance on Neanderthal tools, used to haft stone points onto wooden shafts. Birch tar doesn't occur naturally. You can't just find it. You have to make it, and you have to make it by dry distillation. You have to heat birch bark to about 350 degrees Celsius. But, and this is the tricky part, you have to do it without letting the bark burn. You need oxygen. Free conditions. If you try to do this in your backyard today, you will fail. It requires a complex setup, an earthen kiln, precise temperature control. If it gets too cool, you get no tar. If it gets too hot, you get ash. Neanderthals invented this industrial chemical process 200,000 years ago. Long before modern humans were painting caves, Neanderthals were chemical engineers. This isn't the behavior of a brute. This is the behavior of a sophisticated intellect capable of abstract reasoning, experimentation, and passing complex procedural knowledge down through generations. And then there is the question of language. Did they speak? For a long time, we said no. We said they just grunted. We looked at their throats and said the anatomy wasn't right. But then we found the hyoid bone in 1989 in a cave in Israel called Kabara. Searchers found a Neanderthal hyoid. This is a small, U-shaped bone that floats in the neck and supports the tongue. It is crucial for speech. And the Neanderthal hyoid, it was virtually identical to yours. Then we looked at their DNA. We found the FOXP2 gene. This is often called the language gene. Though that's a simplification, it's a gene that is critical for the fine motor control of the mouth and face required for speech. Humans who have a broken copy of this gene have profound difficulties speaking. Neanderthals, they had the same version of the gene that we do. They had the hardware for speech. They had the genetic software for speech. They lived in complex groups. They coordinated complicated hunts. They taught difficult technologies. The idea that they did this in silence or with simple grunts is absurd. They spoke. They told stories. They gave names to things. They probably had dialects. They probably cracked jokes. They probably argued. So, here we have a species that is physically stronger than us, tougher than us, and possessing a brain that is larger and just as capable of technological innovation. They have fire. They have clothes. They have spears. They have family structures. They have compassion. They are not a failed draft of humanity. They are a masterpiece, a different kind of human, optimized for a different kind of world. So the mystery deepens. If they were so capable, if they had the hardware and the intelligence, what went wrong? Why did the tanks fail? To understand that, we have to look at the cost of being a tank. We have to look at the price tag of perfection. Because in evolution, there is no such thing as a free lunch. Every strength is a weakness in disguise. And the Neanderthals were paying a very high price for their supremacy. Think about your smartphone. It's an amazing device. But if you run high-performance apps on it all day, games, video editing, GPS, the battery drains fast. You are constantly looking for a charger. The Neanderthal body was a high-performance machine running on overdrive, and the battery life. That was the problem. Their massive muscles, their huge brains, their heat-generating metabolism, all of it demanded fuel. Enormous amounts of fuel. We are like a Toyota Prius. We are efficient. We can run on low-quality fuel. We can go a long, long way on a single tank. We are scrawny, yes, but we are cheap to run. The Neanderthal was a Hummer. It could go places the Prius couldn't. It could crush obstacles the Prius would have to drive around. But it got 4 miles to the gallon. And 45,000 years ago, the gas stations started closing. The climate didn't just get cold. It got chaotic. The rapid oscillations of the late Ice Age broke the stable ecosystems Neanderthals relied on. The forests opened up into tundra. The ambush spots disappeared. The herds became unpredictable. Suddenly, the high cost of being a Neanderthal became a liability. If a modern human fails a hunt, they are skinny and efficient. They can survive on roots, on shellfish, on scraps for a few days. They can run on fumes. If a Neanderthal fails a hunt, the clock starts ticking much faster. Their massive metabolic engine starts eating itself. They starve quicker. This is the specialist's trap. Evolution honed them to be the perfect key for a specific lock. The frozen forests of Ice Age Europe. But when the lock changed, the key no longer turned. And while they were struggling to turn that jammed key, while they were hungry and stressed and watching the forests die, we walked in. We didn't have their strength. We didn't have their cold tolerance. But we had something else. We had a new kind of software. We had a way of organizing ourselves that turned our weakness into our greatest weapon. We brought with us a technology that had nothing to do with stone or wood or bone. It was a social technology, a way of connecting minds that allowed us to function not just as individuals, but as a superorganism. The Neanderthals were looking at the world through the eyes of a solitary genius. We were looking at it through the eyes of a network, and in the end, the network always wins. But let's pause for a moment. Let's step away from the cold mechanics of biology and look at something softer, something that haunts the archaeological record like a ghost. Because if we only look at their muscles and their tools, we miss the most important part of the story. We miss their hearts. For a long time, the scientific consensus was brutal. It said that Neanderthals were incapable of symbolic thought, incapable of art, and incapable of love. We projected our own shadow onto them. We assumed that because they looked different, they must feel less. We assumed that life in the Ice Age was so hard, so unforgiving, that there was no room for anything but survival. But the Earth remembers differently. Travel with me now to the Zagros Mountains of northern Iraq, to a massive cavern called Shanidar Cave. It is a cathedral of stone, a place where the ceiling soars high above the floor, where sunlight filters in through the entrance like a spotlight. In the 1950s and 60s, excavators found something here that changed everything. They found graves, deep in the sediment. They uncovered the remains of a Neanderthal known as Shanidar IV. He was curled up on his side, resting peacefully. But it wasn't the skeleton that mattered most. It was the soil around him. When scientists analyzed the dirt samples from the grave, they found clumps of pollen, lots of it. And not just random pollen blown in by the wind. The pollen came from specific plants. Yarrow, cornflower, bachelor's button, St. Barnaby's thistle, grape hyacinth, hollyhock. These are not food plants. These are medicinal herbs, and more importantly, they are colorful, vibrant flowers. The implication is staggering. Try to picture the scene. It is 60,000 years ago. A member of the tribe has died. The grief is heavy in the air, a physical weight on the shoulders of the survivors. They don't just leave the body for the hyenas. They dig a hole in the hard, rocky earth. They gently lower him in. And then, in a gesture that bridges the gap of tens of thousands of years, they go out into the hillside. They gather armfuls of bright yellow, blue, and white flowers, and they weave them into a bed, or perhaps sprinkle them over the body. They are marking the passing of a life with beauty. They are saying, "You mattered, you were here, and we will miss you." There is controversy about the pollen, of course. Some scientists argue it was brought in by burrowing rodents. Science is always skeptical, as it should be. But even if we set the flowers aside, the bones themselves tell a story of profound compassion that cannot be debunked. Let's go back to Shanidar I, the old man we mentioned earlier. Let's really look at him, because his skeleton is a biography of pain. At some point in his youth, he suffered a crushing blow to the left side of his face. It fractured his eye socket, likely leaving him blind in one eye. The blow was so severe it may have caused brain damage affecting his motor control. He also had a withered right arm. The bones were thin and wasted. The arm had been amputated or fell off at the elbow, likely years before he died. He had severe arthritis. He had a healed fracture in his foot that would have made walking painful and slow. He was deaf, his ear canals blocked by bony growths. In the animal kingdom, Shanidar I is dead within weeks of his first injury. A blind, one-armed, limping predator cannot hunt. He cannot defend himself. He is a caloric burden on the pack. By the cold logic of natural selection, he should have been left behind in the snow to conserve resources for the healthy. But he wasn't Shanidar. One lived to be 40 or 50 years old. That is a ripe old age for a Neanderthal. He lived for decades with these disabilities. That means someone else hunted for him. Someone else chewed his food when his teeth wore down. Someone else guided him by the good arm when the terrain got rough. Someone else sat with him by the fire and told him what was happening in the darkness he could no longer see or hear. This isn't just instinct. This is care. This is the distinct, uniquely human ability to value a life not for what it can produce, but simply because it exists. Because he was their father, their brother, their friend. So when you imagine the Neanderthals, don't picture a soulless brute. Picture a granddaughter guiding a blind grandfather through a blizzard. Picture a mother placing a hyacinth flower on a fresh grave. They felt the same crushing weight of loss that we feel. They felt the same fierce protective love for their vulnerable. They were human in every way that counts. And perhaps that deep emotional bonding was part of why they held on for so long. In a world of ice, love is a survival strategy. It keeps the group together. It keeps the fire lit. But love, unfortunately, cannot change the laws of thermodynamics. And this brings us to the tragedy at the center of their biology. The very thing that made them kings of the ice was also the anchor that would eventually drag them down. We need to talk about the trap. The specialist trap. Evolution is a game of trade-offs. You can't be good at everything. If you want to be fast, you have to be light, which means you can't be strong. If you want to be strong, you have to be heavy, which means you can't be fast. Every biological adaptation has a price tag attached to it. The Neanderthals had gone all in on a specific strategy. They were the ultimate power build. As we saw, they had massive muscles, dense bones, and huge brains. They were built to generate and retain heat. They were built to dominate the physical landscape of Europe. But this power came with a staggering maintenance cost. Think of the human body as an engine. You put fuel in, food, and you get energy out. A modern human male living an active lifestyle burns about 2,500 calories a day. Maybe 3,000 if he's really pushing it. A Neanderthal male. The estimates are terrifying. To keep that massive, muscle-bound heat, generating body running in a freezing environment, a Neanderthal needed between 4,000 and 5,000 calories every single day. Some estimates for lactating Neanderthal women go even higher, up to 6,000 calories. Let's put that in perspective. That is the caloric equivalent of eating 60 to 70 apples a day, or 8 pounds of lean venison, every single day. They weren't just hungry, they were walking furnaces that needed a constant stream of high-grade fuel just to keep the pilot light on. If a modern human skips a meal, we get grumpy. If a Neanderthal skipped a meal, their physiological systems began to crash. This exorbitant energy cost dictated their entire existence. They couldn't afford to forage for berries and roots for 12 hours a day. The caloric return on investment was too low. They couldn't survive on small game like rabbits or birds. You'd have to catch dozens of them just to survive the night. They needed big payouts. They needed mammoths. They needed woolly rhinos. They needed bison. They needed animals that were packed with fat and protein. They were top-tier carnivores, occupying a niche similar to wolves or lions. In fact, isotope analysis of Neanderthal bones shows that their diet was almost 90% meat. They were hyper-carnivores. And this is where the trap lies. In ecology, top predators are always rare. There are always fewer lions than there are gazelles. Why? because the energy required to support a top predator is massive. The ecosystem can only support a small number of them. Neanderthal populations were never large. They lived in small scattered bands, spread thin across the landscape, because the land simply couldn't support a high density of such hungry creatures. This low population density made them vulnerable. If a disease swept through a band of 20 people, that band was gone forever. There were no neighbors to fill the gap. If a winter was particularly harsh and the mammoth herd didn't show up, the entire lineage ended. They were living on a razor's edge, balancing their massive caloric checkbook against a hostile world. But for 300,000 years the gamble paid off. The checkbook balanced. The mammoths were plentiful. The forests were thick. The ambush hunting strategy worked. They were the masters of their domain. But they were specialists. And the first rule of evolution is this: specialists thrive when conditions are stable, but they die when conditions change. Generalists, like us, struggle when conditions are stable because the specialists outcompete them. But when the world goes crazy, the generalist inherits the earth. And around 45,000 years ago, the world went crazy. We call it the marine isotope stage 3. It's a dry scientific name for a period of absolute climatic chaos. Imagine living in a world where the weather doesn't just change from season to season, but flips violently from century to century, or even decade to decade. One lifetime, the forest is thick and lush. The next, the trees are dying, replaced by dry, windswept scrub. The next, the glaciers are advancing, swallowing the valleys in ice. The stable, predictable ice age that the Neanderthals had mastered was ending. The climate began to flicker like a dying light bulb. Rapid warming events followed by brutal cooling spikes. The landscape of Europe transformed. The dense woodlands, the Neanderthals' favorite hunting grounds, began to recede. The trees died back, unable to cope with the erratic shifts in temperature and moisture. In their place, the mammoth steppe expanded. This was a vast open grassland stretching from France to Russia. It was cold, dry, and exposed. There was no cover, no place to hide. For a Neanderthal, this was a nightmare. Remember how they hunted? They were wrestlers. They needed to get close. They relied on trees, ridges, and complex terrain to sneak up on their prey and unleash their explosive strength. They were built for the sprint, not the marathon. Now, imagine a Neanderthal band standing on the edge of a vanishing forest, looking out over miles of flat, frozen grassland. They can see the herd of reindeer in the distance. But the herd is a mile away, and there is nowhere to hide. To eat, they have to cross that open ground. They have to run, but they aren't built for running. Their heavy bones and short legs make long-distance running energetically expensive. Every step costs them more calories than it costs a wolf or a modern human. And even if they get close, the animals can see them coming. The prey adapts. The herds become skittish, moving faster, staying in the open. The ambush predator is stripped of his cloak of invisibility. The hunts begin to fail. One day you come back empty-handed. The next day the same. The children are crying. The old ones are silent. The furnace in your chest is screaming for fuel, but there is no coal to shovel in. You try to adapt. You try to catch smaller game, but you are too big, too slow. You spend more energy chasing a hare than you get from eating it. It's a thermodynamic death spiral. And it wasn't just the food. The changing landscape fragmented their world even further. As the forests broke apart into isolated islands of trees, the Neanderthal populations broke apart with them. Groups became cut off from one another. The gene pool, already small, began to shrink. Inbreeding increased. Resilience dropped. It was a slow-motion catastrophe, not a bang, but a strangulation. The world they were built for was evaporating, day by day, tree by tree. They were the perfect key for a lock that no longer existed. And just as they were grappling with this new hostile reality, just as they were weak, hungry, and scattered, they looked up and saw silhouettes on the horizon, strange figures. Tall, slender, moving with an easy, efficient lope across the open plains, carrying weapons that looked flimsy, but flew through the air like birds. The generalists had arrived, and the lonely night was about to get much darker. Imagine standing at the edge of the tree line. You are a Neanderthal hunter. You are draped in heavy furs, your breath steaming in the frigid air, your feet planted solidly on the frozen earth. You are watching a valley you have hunted for 20 years. It is your valley. You know every rock, every bend in the river, every scent on the wind. But today, the wind carries a scent you don't recognize. You look down into the river basin, and you see them. Strangers. A band of figures moving along the water's edge. And the first thing you think is that they are sick. They look broken. They are impossibly tall, like saplings stretched out by the sun. Their limbs are long and spindly, with no muscle on them to speak of. Their chests are flat. They look fragile, as if a strong gust of winter wind would snap them in half, and their skin is wrong. It is dark, the color of rich earth or deep bark, absorbing the weak sunlight rather than reflecting it. They are creatures of the heat, lost in a world of ice. You watch them shiver. You watch them huddle together constantly. You see them struggling through the snowdrifts that you would simply plow through. To your eyes, they are pathetic. They are a mistake of nature. A tropical ape that took a wrong turn and ended up in the freezer. If you were a betting creature, you would bet that they will be dead by winter. The cold will take them. The wolves will take them. The hunger will take them. They are visibly unsuited for this world. But then you notice something. You notice how they move. They don't move like a pack of wolves, and they don't move like a solitary bear. They move like a stream of water, constant, fluid communication. They are making sounds, rapid, clicking, singing sounds, that carry across the valley. They are pointing, they are coordinating, and they are carrying things. Not just spears, they have pouches, they have ornaments. They have tools you don't recognize. You step back into the shadows of the forest. You don't know it yet, but you are looking at the end of your world. You are looking at Homo sapiens. You are looking at us. We arrived in Europe around 45,000 years ago, spilling out of the Levant, moving up the Danube corridor, spreading along the Mediterranean coast. We were the invaders, but we weren't invading with armies. We were invading with families. We were invading with bands of 20 or 30 people, just looking for the next meal, just like you. But to the Neanderthal watching from the ridge, we must have been terrifyingly alien. We were the other in the most absolute sense, and yet we were so similar. We walked on 2 legs, we made fire, we laughed, we cried. It is easy to imagine that first contact, the tension, the curiosity, the fear. Did we approach with open hands? Did we throw stones? Did we stare at each other across a river for days? two branches of the human family tree separated by 500,000 years of evolution, trying to recognize the humanity in each other's eyes. We know from the genetics that we got close enough to touch. We got close enough to mate. But we also know that eventually, wherever we went, the Neanderthals vanished. The arrival of the dark-skinned ones was the harbinger of silence. But here is the twist. You probably have a picture in your head of how this happened. It's a picture painted by Victorian historians in Hollywood movies. It's a picture of war. We love a good war story. We love the idea of the conquest of Earth. We imagine our ancestors as warrior kings marching into Europe, slaughtering the primitive Neanderthals in a great, bloody crusade. We imagine battles. We imagine genocides. We imagine a violent, dramatic takeover where the superior intellect crushed the brute force. It makes for a good movie, but it's almost certainly wrong. If there was a war, it was the strangest war in history, because it left no trace. We have found thousands of Neanderthal skeletons and thousands of early modern human skeletons, and do you know what we rarely find? Evidence of violence between them. We don't find Neanderthal skulls with sapiens spear points embedded in them. We don't find mass graves of slaughtered tribes. We don't find burned villages. We find violence, sure. Life was hard. People got hit on the head. People fell off cliffs. But we don't find the signature of organized warfare. The reality of the extinction is much more subtle and in a way much more chilling. It wasn't a bang. It was a whimper. It wasn't a murder. It was a displacement. Think about it like this. Imagine two businesses open up in the same small town. One is a family-owned hardware store that has been there for 50 years. They know everyone. They are solid. They are reliable. But they have high overhead costs. They need to sell a lot of hammers every day just to keep the lights on. Then, a new store opens across the street. It's a franchise. It's leaner. It has a slightly better supply chain. It stays open an hour later. It sells hammers for 2% less. There is no war. The employees of the new store don't go across the street and burn down the old hardware store. They might even be friendly. They might wave to each other, but month by month, year by year, the customers drift. The new store is just slightly more convenient, just slightly more efficient. And in a town with a limited number of customers, or in the Ice Age, a limited number of mammoths, that slight edge is everything. 1 year, the family store misses its profit margin by 1%. The next year by 2%. It eats into their savings. They can't afford to fix the roof. They lay off an employee. It's a slow, grinding death. And eventually, one day, the open sign just doesn't turn on. This is what scientists call the competitive exclusion principle. Two species cannot occupy the exact same ecological niche indefinitely. If they compete for the same resources, one will eventually out-compete the other. And the difference doesn't have to be huge. That's the scary part. We didn't need to be 10 times better than the Neanderthals. We didn't need to be smarter or stronger. We just needed to be 2% more efficient. If a sapiens tribe could extract 2% more calories from the same landscape than a Neanderthal tribe, that's it. Game over. It might take 1,000 years. It might take 50 generations. But the math is inevitable. The sapiens population grows slightly faster. The Neanderthal population shrinks slightly faster. The sapiens babies survive a little more often. The Neanderthal babies die a little more often. Slowly, the sapiens bands expand. They occupy the prime hunting grounds. They take the best caves. The Neanderthals are pushed to the margins, to the mountains, to the badlands where the deer are scarce. They aren't killed, they are just squeezed. Squeezed out of existence by the relentless pressure of a slightly more efficient competitor. So, what was that 2% advantage? What was the secret sauce that allowed the skinny, shivering invaders to displace the masters of the ice? It wasn't raw intelligence. As we've seen, their brains were just as big. It wasn't bravery. They hunted mammoths with handheld spears. It was technology, but specifically, it was a technology of distance. Let's go back to the hunt. Picture the Neanderthal strategy again. It is a strategy of intimacy. To kill a bison, a Neanderthal has to get within touching distance. He has to hold a heavy, thrusting spear, essentially a thick, sharpened stick, maybe tipped with stone, and drive it into the animal with sheer muscular force. This is effective. A thrusting spear causes massive damage, but it is terrifyingly dangerous. A bison fights back. It thrashes, it gores, it kicks. This is why Neanderthals had so many broken bones. Every successful hunt was a roll of the dice with death. Now, look at the sapiens. We brought something with us from Africa. A piece of wood that looks deceptively simple, but which represents a quantum leap in physics. The spear thrower, the atlatl. This is a stick, maybe 2 feet long, with a hook at the end. You rest the butt of a light, flexible dart against the hook. You hold the handle, and when you throw, the atlatl acts as an extension of your arm. It adds an extra joint. It increases the leverage. Suddenly, you aren't throwing a spear with your shoulder muscles alone. You are using physics to store kinetic energy and release it with a snap. The result is velocity. A dart thrown with an atlatl flies faster than 100 miles per HR. It hits with the force of a magnum bullet, but more importantly, it travels. A sapiens hunter can kill a deer from 50 yards away. He can kill a mammoth from a safe distance while standing behind a tree. Think about the economics of this. The economy of pain. If a Neanderthal hunts 10 times, he might get injured once. That injury means he can't hunt for a month. He becomes a burden. His family starves. If a sapiens hunts 10 times, he gets injured 0 times, because he is never close enough to get kicked. If he misses, he doesn't get gored. He just picks up another dart and throws again. This is a massive reduction in occupational hazards. It means sapiens hunters lived longer. They had more years to provide for their children. They had more years to become grandparents and pass on knowledge. They broke fewer bones, but the advantage goes deeper because we had projectile weapons. We could hunt a wider range of animals. We weren't limited to the slow, heavy megafauna that you could ambush. We could hit fast-moving prey. We could take down ibex on cliffs or birds on the ground, or small deer that would easily outrun a Neanderthal. This broadened our menu. When the mammoths began to disappear because of the climate, the Neanderthals were in trouble. Their specialized hunting style didn't work on rabbits. You can't ambush a rabbit with a heavy thrusting spear. It's a waste of calories. But a sapiens with a net or a snare or a light dart. We could eat anything. We turned the entire landscape into a buffet. This is the power of the projectile. It is the power of action at a distance. It disconnected the act of killing from the risk of dying. And it wasn't just spears. We brought the bow and arrow. the ultimate distance weapon. The archaeological evidence for bows in Europe 40,000 years ago is debated, but we certainly had the technology in Africa before we left. Even if it was just light javelins and atlatals, the principle remains the same. We prioritized safety and efficiency over raw power. Imagine a Neanderthal watching a sapiens hunt. He sees the skinny intruder stand far away, flick his wrist, and watch the animal fall. It must have looked like magic. It must have looked like cheating. Why don't they fight? The Neanderthal might have wondered, why don't they grab the beast? Where is their honor? Where's their strength? But evolution doesn't care about honor. It doesn't care about bravery. It cares about calories in versus calories out. It cares about surviving to see tomorrow. And the sapiens technology, this simple shift from the heavy thrusting spear to the light projectile, tilted the math in our favor. It was the lever that moved the world so. There was no great battle of the heavyweights. There was no day where the sapiens army lined up against the Neanderthal army. There was just 1,000 years of quiet, relentless efficiency. 1,000 years of sapiens hunters coming back to camp with a kill slightly more often than their Neanderthal neighbors. 1,000 years of sapiens children growing up slightly healthier because their fathers weren't crippled by broken legs. The Neanderthals weren't conquered by warriors. They were out-innovated by nerds. They were dismantled by a better business model. But there was one other weapon we had. A weapon even more powerful than the spear thrower. A weapon that didn't kill animals, but binded people. We mentioned earlier that the Neanderthals lived in small, isolated groups. They were islands in the forest. We were a network, and to understand why that mattered, why the first social network was the final nail in the Neanderthal coffin, we have to look at what happens when things go wrong, because in the Ice Age, things always go wrong. A famine hits, a volcano erupts, the winter doesn't end. When disaster struck a Neanderthal band, they were alone. They had to face it with the resources they had in their cave. If they failed, they died. When disaster struck a sapiens band, we did something extraordinary. We packed up, we walked 100 miles, and we walked into the camp of a completely different group of strangers. And instead of killing us, they fed us. Why? How did we pull that off? How did we trick a bunch of heavily armed strangers into sharing their food? That is the story of the next great advantage. The advantage of symbols, the advantage of the wide web. And it is the reason why, when the last Neanderthal looked out of his cave, he saw only darkness. But when we looked out, we saw lights on the horizon. But the spear thrower wasn't the only technology we brought with us. We brought something else, something invisible yet stronger than rock and more durable than bone. We brought a network. If you excavate a Neanderthal site, you find stone tools made from local materials. The flint usually comes from a quarry a few miles away. Maybe a day's walk at most. Their world was intensely local. They lived their entire lives within a radius of perhaps 30 or 40 miles. They knew every tree, every cave, every pebble in that circle. But beyond that circle, the map was blank. It was here be dragons. Now look at a sapiens site from the same period. You find flint from quarries 200 miles away. You find seashells used as jewelry in camps located in the middle of the continent. Weeks of walking from the nearest ocean. You find obsidian volcanic glass that has traveled across mountain ranges. How did those shells get there? Did a single hunter walk 400 miles to the beach, pick up a shell, and walk back? Unlikely. That would be a suicide mission in the Ice Age. Number the shell was passed, hand to hand, camp to camp, tribe to tribe. It was traded. This tells us something profound about the way our ancestors thought. It tells us that they had relationships with people they didn't see every day. It tells us they had friends of friends. They had built a web of obligation, exchange, and kinship that stretched across the entire continent. Think about what that means for survival. Imagine a terrible winter hits your valley. The snow is 10 feet deep. The reindeer herds don't migrate through the pass this year. They took a different route. For a Neanderthal band isolated in their local bubble, this is a catastrophe. They are trapped. They have no knowledge of the world beyond their valley, and more importantly, they have no allies there. They sit in their cave, rationing their last scraps of dried meat. They wait for the end. When the food runs out, the lineage dies. The silence claims them. But for a sapiens band, when the valley goes dark, they have an option. They have an insurance policy. They remember the shell necklace. They remember the strangers they met at the big river gathering 2 summers ago. They remember the distant cousins who live beyond the mountains, so they pack up. They walk. They cross the pass. And when they arrive at the camp of the strangers, they aren't greeted with spears. They are greeted with recognition. They show the shell. They speak the common dialect. They share a story. And they are taken in. They survive the winter on someone else's surplus. And maybe, 5 years later, when the famine hits the other group, the favor is returned. This is the first social network. It wasn't digital, it was visceral. It was a safety net woven out of beads, shared rituals, and marriages between distant groups. It allowed sapiens to act as a collective superorganism. It smoothed out the risks of the environment. Neanderthals didn't have this. Their groups were insular. They were xenophobic by necessity. Evolution had programmed them to trust only the face they knew. When resources vanished in their territory, they had nowhere to go. They were strong, yes, but they were brittle. We were weak, but we were connected. And in a chaotic world, connectivity is resilience. Now let's look at another piece of software we developed. It seems trivial. If you saw it in a museum case, you would walk right past it. It is a tiny sliver of bone, about 2 inches long, polished to a shine, with a microscopic hole drilled in one end. The eyed needle, it appeared in the archaeological record around the time modern humans took over Europe. The Neanderthals never invented it. They had awls, pointed sticks to punch holes in leather, but they never made the leap to the needle and thread. Why does that matter? It matters because of thermodynamics. Neanderthals wore clothes, they had to. But their clothing was likely simple. They draped hides over their bodies, tied them with thongs. Imagine wearing a heavy poncho or a cape. It blocks the wind, sure. It keeps the rain off. But as you move, it flaps. Cold air rushes in through the gaps. Warm air. The precious heat generated by your body escapes. It is a leaky system, and to compensate for that leak, the Neanderthal body had to burn more calories to keep the core temperature up. Their biology had to do the work that their technology couldn't. The needle changed the physics of clothing. With a needle and thread, made from animal sinew or plant fibers, you can do something revolutionary. You can tailor. You can cut a piece of leather to the exact shape of a human arm. You can sew it into a cylinder. You can attach it to a torso piece. You can make pants that fit snugly against the leg. You can create a hood that seals around the face. When you wear tailored clothing, You are creating a seal. You are trapping a layer of dead air between your skin and the leather. Your body heats up that air, and the clothing keeps it there. You are walking around in a personal, portable microclimate. This is the parka principle. A modern human wearing a well-made fur parka can sit still in minus 30-degree weather and be perfectly fine. We don't need to have a barrel chest. We don't need to burn 5,000 calories a day. We rely on the trapped air to keep us warm. The sapiens who entered Europe were tropical animals. We were tall, thin with high surface area. Bodies designed to shed heat, not keep it. We should have frozen to death in the first week. But we didn't, because we hacked the environment. We outsourced our thermal regulation to our tools. A Neanderthal is biologically adapted to the cold. He is the parka. A sapiens is culturally adapted to the cold. He wears the parka. The difference is energy. Because our clothing was so efficient, we didn't need to eat as much as they did. We could survive on a smaller hunt. We could devote those extra calories to other things, like making better tools or socializing, or just keeping our babies alive. The needle was a weapon. It was a weapon against the second law of thermodynamics. And the Neanderthals, shivering under their loose capes, burning through their fat reserves just to stay alive through the night, were fighting a losing battle against a competitor who had figured out how to steal heat from the air itself. But there was one final innovation, one final partnership that sealed the fate of the old world. And this one feels personal, because if you are listening to this at home, you might have the descendant of this innovation sleeping at the foot of your bed right now. The dog, for most of human history, the wolf was the enemy. It was the thing in the dark with glowing eyes. It was the competitor that stole your kill and threatened your children. Neanderthals lived alongside wolves for hundreds of thousands of years. They fought them. They killed them. They probably respected them. But they never befriended them. But sometime around 30,000 or 40,000 years ago. The dates are fuzzy, but it aligns with the sapiens takeover. Something changed. Some group of modern humans, somewhere on the mammoth steppe, crossed the line. Maybe they took in some abandoned pups. Maybe the wolves started following the camps to eat the scraps, and the humans let them stay because they barked when a lion approached. We don't know the exact moment, but we know the result. We domesticated the wolf. We created the dog. And this wasn't about having a cute pet. This was about military-grade technology. This was about upgrading the human sensor suite. Humans have okay vision. We have terrible hearing compared to a predator, and our sense of smell is practically non-existent. A Neanderthal was better than us. Their visual processing was likely superior, but even a Neanderthal is deaf and blind compared to a wolf. A wolf can smell a deer from a mile away. A wolf can hear the snap of a twig in a blizzard. A wolf can track a wounded animal for 3 days without stopping. When sapiens and wolves joined forces, we created a composite predator, a cyborg. We provided the brains and the projectile weapons. The dogs provided the nose and the speed. Picture the hunt now. A Neanderthal hunting party has to track the game themselves. They have to move slowly, checking for broken branches, sniffing the dung. If they wound an animal and it runs, they have to run after it. If they lose the trail, the meat is gone. A sapiens hunting party with dogs. The dogs find the game. The dogs chase the game. The dogs harass the mammoth or the bison, nipping at its heels, spinning it in circles, confusing it, holding it in place. The humans just have to walk up and throw the spear. And if the animal runs, The dogs track it. You never lose a kill. Estimates suggest that hunting with dogs increases the success rate by 30 to 50%. That is a massive advantage. In an ecosystem where every calorie counts, getting 50% more meat for the same effort is the difference between extinction and expansion. The Neanderthals were alone. They were fighting nature with their own bodies, their own senses. We were not alone. We had recruited nature to fight on our side. We had turned the apex predator of the steppe into a tool. Imagine the psychological impact on a Neanderthal. You are huddled in your cave. You are hungry. And in the distance you hear it. Not the howl of a wild wolf pack, which is scary enough, but the barking of dogs mixed with the voices of men. You see them moving through the valley below. A coordinated team. Two species working as one. You can't sneak up on them. The dogs will hear you. You can't hunt them. The dogs are faster than you. You can't steal their food. The dogs guard the camp. It must have felt like an alien invasion. It must have felt unfair. Why does the wolf walk with them? You might wonder. Why does the forest serve them? Because we were the species that broke boundaries. We broke the boundary between stranger and friend with our networks. We broke the boundary between body and environment with our needles. And we broke the boundary between species with our dogs. The Neanderthals were the masters of their own physical potential. But we were the masters of relationships. We didn't just adapt to the world, we co-opted it. We made it work for us. And as the climate grew colder and the game grew scarcer, those three things, the network, the needle, and the dog, became the triad of survival. They were the software updates that the hardware-focused Neanderthals simply couldn't download. The gap widened, the squeeze tightened. The fires in the Neanderthal caves flickered and died, one by one, not because they weren't strong, but because strength wasn't enough anymore. The rules of the game had changed, and they were playing the old version. And so, we returned to the silence of a species that finds itself increasingly alone in a crowded world. The silence of the last families retreating to the edges of the map, wondering where the game went, wondering why the winters feel colder, wondering why the world has turned against them. It brings us back to that cave in Gibraltar, to the last lonely night. But before the darkness takes them completely, there is one more chapter to tell. A chapter that isn't about competition or extinction or survival of the fittest. It is a chapter about love. And it is the reason why, even though they are gone, they are not truly dead. But let's step back from the cold calculus of calories and competition for a moment. Because if we only look at the extinction of the Neanderthals as a story of technological superiority, we miss the most human part of the narrative. We miss the secret that was hidden in our blood for 40,000 years, waiting for modern science to unlock it. For decades, scientists argued about what happened when we met. Did we fight? Did we ignore each other? Did we treat each other as different species, as alien as a wolf is to a deer? The prevailing theory was total replacement. The idea was that we swept into Europe and replaced them entirely without mixing. We were the oil, they were the water. But in 2010, the Max Planck Institute published the first draft of the Neanderthal genome, and the result was a shockwave that shattered our understanding of human history. It turns out, we didn't just replace them. We didn't just outcompete them. We loved them. Or at least, we were intimate with them. The genetic evidence is undeniable. If you are of non-African descent, if your ancestors walked out of Africa and turned left into Europe or right into Asia, You carry between 2 and 4% Neanderthal DNA in every cell of your body. Think about what that means. It's a dry statistic on a screen, but try to translate it back into the reality of the Ice Age. It means that sometime, somewhere in the rugged mountains of the Middle East, or the snowy forests of the Balkans, a sapiens and a Neanderthal met. And they didn't throw spears. They didn't run away. They crossed the invisible line that separates species. Imagine that encounter. Picture a sapiens hunter far from his tribe, separated by a storm. He is cold. He is lost. He stumbles upon a fire in a cave mouth, and sitting there is a figure, heavier, broader, with eyes that look deep into the skull. By all rights, fear should take over. The uncanny valley effect should kick in, but it doesn't. Perhaps it was a shared piece of meat offered across the flames. Perhaps it was a gesture of curiosity. Perhaps it was simply the overwhelming, crushing loneliness of the Pleistocene wilderness that made any other human face, no matter how different, look like salvation. They found each other, and they created life. We know these children existed. We have found skeletons that look like hybrids, a mix of the graceful sapiens build and the robust Neanderthal frame. But we don't need bones to prove it. We are the proof. That 2% of DNA you carry isn't junk. It's a record of a love story, or at least a lost story, that happened 50,000 generations ago. It tells us that the boundaries we draw between us and them were permeable. It tells us that despite the competition, despite the slow squeeze of resources, there were moments of profound connection. Maybe it happened often. Maybe sapiens groups adopted Neanderthal orphans. Maybe Neanderthal groups took in lost sapiens wanderers. Maybe there were entire communities for a brief golden moment where the two lineages lived side by side, sharing tools, sharing fires, sharing beds. It softens the tragedy, doesn't it? To know that the end wasn't purely violent. To know that in the cold dark of the Paleolithic, hands reached out across the divide. But biology is cruel, and while individuals might have found love, the populations were moving in opposite directions. The math was relentless, and this brings us to the mechanism of their disappearance, the slow, suffocating reality of the shrinking circle. Evolution is a numbers game. To survive, a species needs diversity. You need a large enough gene pool to shuffle the deck, to weed out bad mutations, to keep the population healthy. If the pool gets too small, the water becomes stagnant. Neanderthals had always lived in small groups, but as the climate changed and the sapiens expanded, those groups were cut off from each other. Imagine the map of Europe 50,000 years ago. It is a vast, interconnected web of Neanderthal territories. They can move. They can mate with neighbors. The genes flow like a river. But as the forests recede and the sapiens bands claim the prime valleys, the Neanderthal map begins to look like Swiss cheese. The holes get bigger. The solid ground gets smaller. A band in a valley in France is cut off from a band in Germany. A family in Italy can no longer reach their cousins in Spain. The sapiens networks, those wide webs we talked about, are filling the gaps, acting like a barrier. The river of genes dries up into isolated puddles. We can see the horrific results of this in the DNA from the Altai Mountains in Siberia. Scientists sequenced the genome of a Neanderthal woman who lived there near the end. When they looked at her parents' DNA, they found something heartbreaking. Her parents were closely related. Very closely related. They were likely half-siblings. or perhaps an uncle and a niece. This wasn't because of some cultural taboo being broken. It was because there was no one else left. The group was so small, so isolated, that the only options for a mate were your own family. This is the extinction vortex. It's a mathematical trap. As the population shrinks, inbreeding increases. Inbreeding leads to genetic defects, weaker immune systems, and lower fertility. This makes the population shrink even faster, which leads to more inbreeding. It is a downward spiral that is almost impossible to escape. You can imagine the despair of the elders in these groups. They watch the young ones born sickly. They watch pregnancies fail. They watch the strength of the tribe dilute, generation by generation. They don't understand genetics. They don't understand DNA. They just know that the favor of the spirits has turned against them. They just know that the babies are too quiet. Meanwhile, just over the ridge, the sapiens are booming. They are mixing their genes across hundreds of miles. Their babies are loud, robust, and numerous. The contrast must have been devastating. The Neanderthals were watching their own slow-motion erasure. The circle of firelight was getting smaller, and the darkness was getting closer. And so, they moved. They didn't have a destination. They didn't have a plan. They just moved away from the pressure, away from the open plains where the sapiens hunters dominated, away from the main migration corridors where the dark-skinned ones were flooding in. They retreated to the broken lands, the mountains, the dense forests, the peninsulas. This wasn't a coordinated military retreat. It was a chaotic generational drift. A band in Germany moves south into the Alps. A band in France moves west toward the coast. They are seeking refuge. They are looking for a place where the world makes sense again. A place where the old ways still work, and this drift had a direction. South and west, towards the Iberian Peninsula, towards modern-day Spain and Portugal. Why there? Because the climate there was milder. The ice sheets hadn't swallowed it completely. The forest still held on. It was a refugium, a lifeboat for the Pleistocene ecology. For thousands of years, Iberia became the last stronghold. While the rest of Europe transformed into a sapiens world, the Neanderthals held on in the rugged valleys of Spain. They continued to make their tools. They continued to hunt the ibex and the deer. They continued to bury their dead. It was a ghost kingdom, a twilight realm where the old gods still ruled. But even a peninsula has an end. And this brings us to the final geography of extinction. Look at the map of Europe. It ends at the Atlantic. It ends at the Pillars of Hercules. As the sapiens populations continue to expand, pushing down over the Pyrenees, filtering along the coastlines, the Neanderthals were pushed into a corner. They were backed against the ocean. There was nowhere left to run. To the north and east, the sapiens. To the south and west, the endless, impassable water. Imagine the psychological weight of that. For hundreds of generations, the strategy had been move. If resources are scarce, move. If competitors arrive, move. But now you stand on the cliffs. You look out at the gray, churning water of the Atlantic, and you realize the land has run out. The Rock of Gibraltar became the final fortress. It is a massive limestone monolith, riddled with caves, standing guard over the entrance to the Mediterranean. It is a natural shelter, high, defensible, filled with the kind of deep, complex caverns that Neanderthals loved. Gorham's Cave, Vanguard Cave. These became the last addresses of the Neanderthal species. Radiocarbon dating suggests they might have lived here as recently as 24,000 years ago. That is shockingly recent. The pyramids were built 4,500 years ago. These guys were holding on until 24,000 years ago, while sapiens were painting the caves of Lascaux in France, creating masterpieces of art. The last Neanderthals were sitting by their fires in Gibraltar, eating mussels and seals, listening to the waves. It must have felt like a siege, but a siege without an army. No one was attacking them. The sapiens weren't storming the rock. They didn't need to. They just occupied the land behind them. They cut off the retreat. The Neanderthals of Gibraltar were castaways on an island of stone. Life went on, of course. They didn't wake up every morning thinking, "We are extinct." They woke up thinking, "I am hungry." They woke up thinking, "The baby is crying." They lived their lives, they loved, they fought, but the circle had shrunk to a single point. Imagine the atmosphere in those caves, the smoke hanging low in the humid sea air. The tools resharpened until they were just nubs, because fresh flint was hard to get. The group size dwindling. 10 people, 6 people, 3 people. There is a profound melancholy in this geography. A species that had ranged from the British Isles to Siberia, that had conquered a continent compressed into a few damp caves on the edge of the sea. It is the physical manifestation of their destiny. They were the people of the solid earth, of the heavy bone and the stone tool, and they were stopped by the fluid, by the shifting ocean, and by the fluid, shifting nature of the new humans. They were trapped between the water and the wave of change, and in that trap, in those caves, the clock finally ran out. The extinction vortex swirled down to its singularity. It brings us back to that image of the last survivor, the individual, because extinction isn't an event that happens to a species. It happens to a person. It happens when the last female dies, or when the last male realizes there is no one left to answer his call. The retreat to Gibraltar wasn't just a migration. It was a funeral procession that lasted 5,000 years, and at the end of the road, there was just the rock, the wind, and the sound of the tide erasing footprints in the sand. But even here, in this ultimate dead end, there is a glimmer of something else. Because recent excavations in Gibraltar have found something purely artistic. A scratching on the rock floor. A hashtag pattern, abstract, deliberate. It suggests that even at the very end, with their backs to the ocean, they were still thinking, still dreaming, still trying to leave a mark. I was here. The circle had closed, but the spark hadn't gone out. Not yet. It was just waiting for the final night to fall. The end didn't happen all at once. It wasn't a curtain dropping on a stage. It was more like a city during a power outage, watching the lights go out one by one, block by block, until only a single window remains lit in the vast, consuming dark. For thousands of years, the map of Europe had been a constellation of Neanderthal campfires. From the snowy peaks of the Caucasus to the limestone cliffs of France, the night was broken by the orange glow of their presence. Voices, stories, the smell of roasting meat, the rhythm of flint striking stone. It was a web of life that spanned a continent. But then, the creeping silence began. It started in the east. The bands in the Levant disappeared first, absorbed or displaced by the incoming tide of sapiens. Then the Balkans went dark. The fires in the Danube Valley sputtered and died. The great heartland of Central Europe, once the undisputed domain of the mammoth hunters, fell silent. It wasn't a dramatic event. A hunting party would go out in the spring and never return. A winter would be just a few degrees colder than the last, and a group already teetering on the edge of starvation would simply not wake up. A lineage that had lasted for 20,000 generations would end in a quiet cave with no one there to witness it. The silence moved west, like a shadow lengthening at sunset. You can imagine the confusion of the survivors. The trade networks we talked about, those tenuous links between groups, began to fray. You travel to the neighboring valley to find a mate, as your father did, and his father before him. But when you get there, the cave is empty, the hearth is cold. The bones of the last meal are scattered by wolves. You call out. You make the deep, resonant hooting sound your people use to signal across distances. But the only answer is the wind whistling through the pines. The echo is hollow. Panic sets in. Not the panic of immediate danger, but the slow, gnawing panic of isolation. The world is getting bigger. The distances are getting longer. The voices are getting fewer. By 30,000 years ago, the silence had swallowed almost everything. The great culture of the Mousterian tool makers was gone. The bear cults were gone. The songs, if they had songs, were forgotten. The constellation of fires had been reduced to a few dying sparks, flickering on the very edge of the Atlantic. The genetic diversity that had once been the strength of a species was now bottled up in a few inbred families clinging to the rocks in Gibraltar. And then there was only one group, and then one family, and then one family, and then one. This is the part of history that hurts to think about. We deal with statistics. We talk about population dynamics and extinction events. But extinction isn't a statistic. It is a biological termination of a universe. Every individual is a universe of memories, skills, feelings, and perceptions. When that last individual dies, a way of seeing the world, a specific, unique consciousness that has existed for 300,000 years, is deleted. Imagine the silence of that final forest. It is deafening. The birds still sing, the waves still crash, but the human frequency, the specific timbre of the Neanderthal voice is gone. The conversation that had been running between the earth and its people for eons has stopped mid-sentence. Now, let's go back. Let's return to where we started. The cave in Gibraltar, Gorham's Cave. The year is, well, it doesn't matter anymore. The dates have lost their meaning. It is simply the end. You are there again. You are the man by the fire. You are the last stroke of the painting, the final note of the symphony. You don't know it, of course. You can't know it. The human mind isn't built to comprehend the concept of species extinction. You just know that you are alone. You wake up in the morning, and the space next to you in the firs is cold. It has been cold for a long time. The others, your brother, your mate, the old woman who knew how to mix the ochre paints, they are gone. Buried under the stones near the entrance, or lost to the sea. You follow the routine. You are a creature of habit, and habit keeps the madness at bay. You check your tools. You inspect the edge of your scraper. It is worn down, almost useless. You need new flint. But the good flint is up the coast, and your legs hurt. The arthritis in your hip. A legacy of a life spent lifting heavy stones and wrestling bison, burns with every step. You go to the cave mouth. The light is gray. The Atlantic is churning. A cauldron of steel, colored water. You scan the horizon, not for game. You aren't hungry today. You are scanning for smoke. Every day you look for it. A thin wisp of gray against the sky. A sign that someone else is out there. a sign that you are not the only consciousness left in this universe of stone and water. But the sky is empty. You spend the day sitting, conserving energy. That old biological imperative, don't waste calories, is still running your operating system, even though there is no future to save calories for. You watch the gulls wheeling in the air. You watch a beetle crawl across the limestone floor. You think about the past. Your memory is sharp. You remember the time the clan took down the red deer stag in the upper valley. You remember the taste of the warm liver. You remember the sound of the laughter that night. It feels real, so real you can almost reach out and touch it. But when you open your eyes, there is only the damp wall of the cave. The sun begins to set. It bleeds into the ocean, turning the water purple and black. This is the hardest time. The twilight. The transition from the world of sight to the world of fear. You build a fire. It is a small, pathetic thing. Just a few twigs and some dried moss. You don't have the strength to drag the big logs anymore. The flames lick up, casting long, dancing shadows against the cave walls. For a moment, the shadows look like people. You turn your head quickly. "Mother," you whisper. The word feels strange in your throat. Rusty, unused, no answer. Just the hiss of the snap in the wood. You eat a handful of pine nuts and some dried mussel meat. It is tasteless. Food is just fuel now. There is no joy in it without the sharing. The night deepens. The stars come out. The same stars that looked down on your ancestors 300,000 years ago. They are cold, in different eyes. You feel a profound, crushing weight in your chest. It is the weight of an unanswered question. You are a social animal. Your brain was evolved to process the complex signals of a tribe, to read faces, to hear voices, to touch skin. Deprived of that, your mind begins to eat itself. You hum a low tone just to hear a voice. The sound bounces off the rock and dies. You wrap your furs around you. You are the heir to a dynasty that survived the Great Freeze. You carry the blood of the mammoth hunters. You are the pinnacle of evolution's design for the cold. But you cannot fight this cold. This is the cold of absolute solitude. You lie down. You watch the fire. One ember glows bright red. Then it fades to dull orange. Then to gray. You close your eyes. You dream. In the dream, the cave is full. The fire is roaring. The children are playing with the knuckle bones of an ibex. The old ones are chanting. You are safe. You are held. You are part of something. And while you dream, your breathing slows. The heart that has beaten for 40 years, a strong rhythmic drum, misses a beat. Then another. The fire goes out. The last breath leaves your lungs and hangs in the air for a moment. A small cloud of vapor. Then it dissipates. The silence is complete. The Neanderthals are gone. Or are they? Here is the thing about ghosts. They don't always haunt houses. Sometimes they haunt smells. If this were a movie, the screen would fade to black right there. It would be a tragedy. The tragic end of the other. The ultimate lonely death. We would walk away feeling a heavy sadness for the loss of our cousins. But science has given us a plot twist. A twist so profound that it rewrites the entire ending of the script. For 100 years, archaeologists looked at the bones of Neanderthals and saw a dead end. They saw a branch of the tree that had snapped off and fallen to the ground to rot. They believed that when that last breath was taken in Gibraltar, the Neanderthal line was extinguished, deleted, gone forever. But then came the genetic revolution. Then came the ability to read the book of life written in the microscopic script of DNA. In 2010, Svante Pääbo and his team did the impossible. They extracted DNA from Neanderthal bone fragments, bones that were tens of thousands of years old. They pieced together the genome. And then they did something audacious. They compared it to the genome of living people. You, me, your neighbor. And they found a match. It turns out the Neanderthals didn't vanish. Not completely. They flowed into us. Remember those nights of love across species. Remember the sapiens and the Neanderthals meeting by the fire. Those weren't just isolated flings. They were bridge building events. When they had children, those hybrid children carried 50% Neanderthal DNA. And when those children grew up and had children with other sapiens, the percentage dropped to 25%. Then 12.5% diluted. Yes, but not erased. Today, if you take a DNA test and your ancestry is from Europe, Asia, or the Americas, basically anywhere outside of sub-Saharan Africa, the results will come back with a number, usually between 2% and 4%. You are part Neanderthal. 2% might sound small. It sounds like a rounding error. But think about the scale. There are 8 billion humans on Earth today. Billions of them carry that 2%. If you add up all the Neanderthal DNA currently walking around on the planet, all the bits and pieces scattered across the human population, it is estimated that at least 40% of the original Neanderthal genome is still alive today. Think about that. There is more Neanderthal DNA on Earth right now inside us than there was when the Neanderthals were actually alive. They are extinct. They are repurposed. They are hiding in plain sight. And this isn't just junk DNA. This isn't just inert code floating in your cells. These genes are doing work. They are active. They are shaping who you are. Do you have straight, thick hair? That might be a Neanderthal gift. Do you have a robust immune system that fights off certain viruses? Thank your Neanderthal ancestors. When we marched out of Africa, we were naive to the diseases of Europe. The Neanderthals had been living there for hundreds of thousands of years. They had evolved immunity. By mating with them, we downloaded their antivirus software. We didn't have to wait 50,000 years to evolve resistance. We inherited it in a single generation. Do you get sunburned easily? Or maybe you tan well? Your skin's reaction to UV light is partly regulated by genes we borrowed from them. They helped us adjust to the weak sunlight of the north, even our brains. Recent studies suggest that some Neanderthal gene variants are linked to how our brains are wired, affecting things like circadian rhythms and even mood. So, when you look in the mirror, you aren't just looking at a pure Homo sapiens. You are looking at a hybrid. You are a mosaic. You are a walking museum. That loneliness of the last survivor in the cave, it was real. But it wasn't the end. His lineage didn't die with him. His cousins, his nieces, his nephews, those who had mixed with the sapiens, they carried the torch. They carried it out of the cave. They carried it into the Neolithic villages. They carried it into the Bronze Age cities. They carried it onto the ships that sailed the oceans. They carried it to the moon. Every time you take a breath of cold air and don't cough, that's them. Every time your blood clots to stop a wound, that's them. Every time you survive a flu virus, that's them. They are the silent passengers in our vessel. They are the ghost in the machine. And there is something incredibly beautiful and incredibly comforting about that. It means that we are not the conquerors who wiped out a rival. We are the vessel that saved them. We are the ark. The Neanderthals gave us their strength. They gave us their adaptations. They gave us the keys to the north, and in return we gave them immortality. We absorbed them into the human story. So, the next time you feel out of place, the next time you feel a little awkward at a party, or you feel a deep, inexplicable pull toward the quiet of the woods, maybe that isn't a dysfunction. Maybe that's just the 2% speaking. Maybe that's the ancient memory of a time when the world was quieter, simpler, and wilder. They never really left. They are just waiting for you to notice them. And this realization changes everything about how we view that last night in Gibraltar. It changes the tragedy into a transformation. The fire didn't go out. It was just shared. It was passed from one hand to another, from one species to another, until the two became one. We are the memory of the earth. We are the result of every survival story that came before us. And as long as we live, the Neanderthals live too. But we need to acknowledge something uncomfortable. We need to admit that we didn't do this alone. There is a narrative we tell ourselves, a story of human exceptionalism, where we marched out of Africa and conquered the world because we were simply better. We were the chosen ones, the golden children of evolution. But the biological reality is far more humbling. The truth is, when we stepped off the African savanna and into the chill of the northern hemisphere, we were woefully unprepared. We were tropical animals. We were naked, fragile, and naive. We were walking into a biological buzzsaw. Europe and Asia weren't just cold, they were filled with pathogens. Viruses, bacteria, ancient plagues that had been evolving in the damp caves and forests for hundreds of thousands of years. Our immune systems, trained in the dry heat of Africa, had no idea how to fight them. We should have been wiped out. Not by the cold, but by the flu, by the strange fevers of the north. So why are we still here? Because we borrowed a shield. When we mated with the Neanderthals, we didn't just inherit their brow ridges or their hair texture. We inherited their immune systems. Scientists have identified a cluster of genes in modern humans called the HLA receptors. Think of these as the bouncers of your immune system. They stand at the door of your cells and check the ID of every protein that walks by. If they recognize a virus, they sound the alarm. The Neanderthals had been living in Europe for 300,000 years. Their bouncers had seen every trick in the book. They had evolved specific defenses against the local diseases. When we mixed our DNA with theirs, we acquired those defenses instantly. We didn't have to wait for evolution to build them from scratch. We simply downloaded their antivirus update that saved us. It is quite possible that without this genetic gift, the colonization of Europe would have failed. We would have been pushed back to the tropics, defeated by the invisible world of microbes. And it's not just immunity. Look at your skin. The gene PNC2. It's a gene associated with skin pigmentation and the ability to produce keratin. Keratin is the tough protein that makes up your hair and nails, but it also strengthens your skin against the cold, preventing it from cracking and drying out. It helps your body synthesize vitamin D in low-light environments. Neanderthals gave us this gene. They gave us the ability to build a thicker, tougher barrier against the elements. So, in a very literal sense, you are wearing a Neanderthal coat. You are protected by a Neanderthal shield. This changes the dynamic of the relationship, doesn't it? We aren't the conquerors who displaced a lesser species. We are the refugees who were taken in. We are the younger siblings who borrowed the winter clothes of the older brother because we were shivering. We survived because they survived first. We stand on their shoulders. Every time you walk through a cold winter wind and don't freeze, every time your body fights off a northern virus, you are using a tool that they forged in the fires of the Ice Age. It is a humbling realization. We are not pure. We are a patchwork. We are a collaborative effort. And the debt we owe to the vanished ones is written in the very proteins that keep us alive. But with their departure, something shifted in the psychology of our planet. Something that has left a scar on our collective consciousness, even if we don't always recognize it. For millions of years, the Earth was a crowded place. Not crowded with people, but crowded with kinds of people. Go back 100,000 years. You had sapiens in Africa, Neanderthals in Europe, Denisovans in Asia, Homo floresiensis, the hobbits on the islands of Indonesia, Homo erectus still lingering in pockets. There were 4, maybe 5, distinct species of human beings walking the earth at the same time. Different minds, different bodies, different ways of being human. It was a world of voices. A choir. If you were a human back then, you knew. You knew that you weren't the only game in town. You knew that if you walked far enough, you would meet the others. Creatures like you, but not you. It provided a context. It meant that humanity wasn't a singularity. It was a spectrum. And then, one by one, the other voices fell silent. The Denisovans vanished into the ghost stream of Asian DNA. The hobbits disappeared from their islands. The ancient erectus lines faded away. And finally, on that lonely night in Gibraltar, the Neanderthals whispered their last goodbye. And for the first time in the history of the hominid family, we were alone. Truly, deeply, existentially alone. We are the last twig on the branch, the only variation left. The survivor who looks around the empty room and realizes everyone else has gone home. I believe this solitude haunts us. I believe it explains so much of our modern anxiety, our desperate search for connection. Think about our obsession with aliens. We look up at the stars and we beg for a signal. We build massive radio telescopes to listen to the static of the universe. We write endless movies and books about first contact. We are terrified of aliens. Yes, but we are also desperate for them. We want to know that we aren't the only intelligence in the darkness. Why? Because we remember, deep in our collective unconscious, deep in the architecture of our brains. We remember a time when we weren't alone. We remember when the woods were full of others. We are missing our cousins. We are suffering from a species level phantom limb pain. We look at the chimpanzees and the bonobos, and we see the resemblance, but the gap is too wide. They are our distant relatives, but they aren't our peers. They can't talk to us. They can't share the burden of consciousness. The Neanderthals could. They were the only ones who understood the joke. They were the only ones who understood the tragedy of mortality in the way we do. And they are gone. We won the planet. We spread to every continent. We built pyramids and skyscrapers and space stations. We became the masters of the earth. But it is a lonely victory. It is the victory of the only child who inherited the entire estate, but has no one to share the memories with. This loneliness drives us. It drives us to fill the silence with noise, to build networks that connect billions of people, to domesticate animals and bring them into our homes, treating dogs and cats like children, just to have another heartbeat nearby. We are trying to recreate the crowded world we lost. We are trying to fill the hole that the Neanderthals left behind. But perhaps in the quiet of the night, when the noise of civilization fades away, we can make peace with this solitude. Perhaps we can reframe it. We aren't alone because we killed the others. We are alone because we are the vessel that carries them all. We are the synthesis, the sapiens, the Neanderthal, the Denisovan. We are the melting pot of the genus Homo. The choir didn't die, it just merged into a single voice, and that voice is yours. So now look at the time, look at the darkness outside your window. The world has slowed down. The frantic pace of the modern day is fading. This is the time of day that belongs to the ancient parts of your brain. The time when the logic of the office and the stress of the news cycle recede, and the older, deeper rhythms take over. Imagine for a moment that you are back in that cave. But this time, it isn't cold. It isn't lonely. The fire is warm. It glows with a steady, comforting amber light, casting soft shadows on the limestone walls. You are wrapped in heavy, soft furs. You are safe. You can hear the wind outside howling across the tundra or crashing against the cliffs of Gibraltar. But it can't reach you here. You are sheltered by the rock. You are protected by the wisdom of 10,000 generations of ancestors who figured out how to survive the night. Think about the journey your DNA has taken to get here. Through the ice, through the volcanic winters, through the plagues and the famines and the long migrations. Against all odds, they survived. The sapiens survived. The Neanderthals survived within us. They passed the torch from hand to hand through the storm without letting the flame go out. And now that torch is resting. You don't need to fight tonight. You don't need to hunt. You don't need to scan the horizon for predators or worry about the coming winter. The work is done. The survival is secured. Your heavy bones, your strong immune system, your brain that dreams, they are all gifts. They are tools that have been polished by millions of years of use, and they are working perfectly. Feel the weight of your body sinking into the bed. That is the gravity that held your ancestors to the earth. Feel the rhythm of your breathing in and out. That is the same rhythm that rose and fell in the chests of the sleepers in Shanadar Cave, in the camps of the Mammoth Steppe, in the shelters of the Ice Age. It is an unbroken chain of breath, a lullaby that has been sung for 300,000 years. You are not alone in the dark. You are surrounded by the echoes of those who came before. They are standing guard, the strong ones, the resilient ones, the ones who found a way. They are part of you. And because they survived the long night, you can rest. Let the history fade. Let the dates and the names and the science dissolve. Let the image of the Neanderthal by the fire blur into the soft darkness behind your eyelids. Everything is okay. The circle is complete. We are the survivors. We are the rememberers. And tonight, we are the sleepers. Good night.